Hi, good evening. Tonight I'm going to talk about the theory of cognitive development and also the zone of proximal development. These are two really interesting learning theories, so I'm just going to delve right in. The first one I'm going to address is the theory of cognitive development. And this is the theory that was developed by a Frenchman in the 1930s. His name was Piaget. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. And he was the first psychologist to actually systematically study the cognitive development to determine how fundamental concepts are merged. And he based this theory that biological maturation and environmental interactions construct the learning process of how a child sees the world. And we're just going to go into the stages of cognitive development. So these stages represent the progression in a child's thought development as determined by their biological maturation and environmental interactions. So as they get older and as their environmental interactions increase, again, they're going to develop a stronger cognitive development. So the first one is the sensorimotor, and this is from birth to 2 years. And this is when a child achieves the ability to know that an object exists, and that object is that is known as object permanence, and it can also form a mental representation of the object. From 2 to 7. The stage is pre-operational, and this is when the child's thinking is still very egocentric and other viewpoints are difficult to accept. The child is able to think symbolically, where a word or object can have another meaning. Concrete operational is the third stage. And this is from 7 to 11 years old. And this is when a child begins to use operational thought or logical thinking to internally understand the world. So things are kind of coming together for a child in this stage where they're trying to really make sense of how the world works. And the last stage is formal operational. And this is from 11 years old and over. And this is when a child begins to think about abstract concepts and actually be able to test hypothesis in a logical manner. If we go over to the left, let's see if I can do this. Move it over. I guess I'm having difficulties moving it. Okay, I won't. When Piaget was delving into this theory, he believed that the origins of thinking, or genetic epistemology, which is basically the concerning the categorization of thinking and the framework of intelligence. So basically, the building blocks of our thinking are called schemas, and these building blocks determine intelligent behavior, and they're organized into knowledge, into categories within our brains. And they link the mental representation of the world for understanding and responding and applying that knowledge to different situations. And let's see, the process of adjusting the world through both assimilation and accommodation grows intelligence, and that process is called adaptation. So if a child when a child already has existing knowledge to deal with a new object or situation, then they can make sense of that world, and that's called assimilation. But if the existing knowledge does not work with the new situation, or an object must be changed to make sense of the world, then that is an accommodation. And an equilibrium is when there is a balance in the child's thinking, where they're able to understand the world around them with their current knowledge base. But when that is not the case, it's a equilibration, and that forces the learning process. That's the drive behind the learning process, where the learner becomes frustrated and seeks to master a new challenge to restore that equilibrium, that balance. So what are the educational implications for this theory? Well, it was actually really influential in creating different types of curriculum. And one of those would be discovery learning. And that's when learning is best through activity, exploration, and actually doing, hands-on doing. And also readiness learning. So information and concepts are introduced within the appropriate cognitive development stage. So really complex concepts aren't going to be introduced before the child is really ready, mature-wise, or if really environmentally wise as well. And so this created a student-centered learning focus, where teachers' role as a facilitator of learning instead of the direct dictation of learning. So teacher is more focused on the process of learning, not the product of the learning. So they also use active teaching methods, individual activities, as well as collaborative, providing problem-solving situations, and they evaluate a child's development for the ability of appropriate tasks. So it made learning much more student-centered than teacher-centered. And now I kind of just want to go over real quickly the other learning theory that we went over in the reading, and that's the zone of proximal development. And this theory studied by Vygotsky during the 1970s, and this theory really emphasized the development of skills and strategies through cooperative learning environments. And these learning environments really enabled less competent learners to gain from their more skillful peers in what is known as the zone of proximal development. Also, it's known as ZPD, and this is to really break it down, the zone of proximal development is the difference between a child's developmental level based on independent problem-solving skills and the potential that's there to raise that level with guidance of peer and collaboration. So on one level, you have a child that that's learning independently, and he can only go as high as his knowledge level base. But if he is in a group situation with peers that are more competent, then the potential is there for him to raise to that next level, if that makes sense, if I'm explaining that correctly. And this ZDP is also known as scaffolding, and this allows students to focus on what they are competent in while building on elements that are initially out of their capacity. So again, they're able to focus on what they're good at while being in an environment that can build on what they're still working towards. So part of effective scaffolding consists of interest in the task at hand. The student has to be interested in what they're doing. It has to keep and maintain their attention. The task needs to be kept simple. You don't want to be able to complicate it too much, otherwise it's not going to be understandable for the student. And the teacher needs to emphasize the solution. Emphasizing a solution gives hints and cues to the student as to what direction they need to go in to acquire the desired outcome of the activity. And the frustration control is really important because you don't want your students getting too frustrated over the task at hand. And the teacher would also want to demonstrate the task. So give an example of what they're supposed to be grasping. So some teacher guidelines when using scaffolding is assess students' knowledge and experience. It's really important to assess that prior knowledge and experience, because that provides a baseline for where the student is at, where their starting baseline is. And they also want to relate content to student ability and understanding. This will help them put the content matter in a context that they can understand and relate to their own lives. And they also want to be able to break up tasks, leaving room for feedback. So if the tasks are broken up, then the teacher can go in and make sure that that students are on the right track. And also verbal cues and prompts are really important to help students grasp the concepts. If they're lost, teacher can kind of coax them in the right direction to set them on the right path for competency. So again, these are just two of the learning theories that we learned this week, and both are really interesting in their own right, and I hope I was able to articulate the basics of both in a manner that is understandable. So thanks. Have a good night.